Hello everyone, my name is Ilva Tare and I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. Welcome to this episode of Balkans Debrief. The Roma are Europe's largest ethnic minority, believed to be between 10 to 12 million people spread around over the continent, the most of whom live in Central and Eastern Europe. Despite their numbers, Roma continue to be one of Europe's most socially excluded and underprivileged communities, with discrimination in work, education, housing, and healthcare. So, what's the solution? How can we address the rampant anti-Roma animosity, and how can we empower this marginalized population? And why are Roma women and men still so drastically disadvantaged compared to the majority population in almost every aspect of social life? It's time to dive in and get some answers from two experts who have an outstanding knowledge of the Roma community challenges, especially in the Western Balkan. Sonja Licht is the president of Foundation BFPE for a Responsible Society. Sonja is joining us from Belgrade. Welcome.
Good to see you.
Thank you. And Zeljko Jovanovic is director of the Open Society Roma Initiatives Office in Berlin. Zeljko, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'll start with the first question, to explain to our audience, who are the Roma people and what are the primary difficulties they confront in terms of social exclusion and discrimination in the Western Balkans? Sonja, we'll start with you.
Well, the Roma, according to existing knowledge, came to Europe more than 10 centuries ago from India and had, I would say, rich but also very turbulent and sometimes very, very difficult times in Europe since. Some of the researchers, and coming both from Roma and non-Roma community, in fact, know very well that Roma had a huge influence on art in the times of Renaissance, for example, that they were also represented in many other trades, skills that were important for Europe at that time. Unfortunately, as times went by, things started becoming very sour, and Roma became more and more isolated in the societies they were living in, although one has to say that they have a very special also skill to integrate if a society is ready to treat them as equal citizens. In the same time, they also had to have a very serious skill of keeping their identity alive, because through all these centuries, and especially in the modern times, including the times of Holocaust, it was very difficult and very often fatal to be part and parcel of the Roma community. And yet, they are still here. And we still have a very huge task in front of us to try to change our societies, to make the Roma really part and parcel of those societies, to make equal citizens. That is what they are striving for, and that is, I would say, the major test for Europe and the European Union and out of the European Union countries as well, how to make everything possible to help Roma to do what they would like to be, equal citizens.
What are their current main challenges in the Western Balkans?
Well, I first of all want to thank you for the interest in the situation of our communities, as well as to Atlantic Council. The challenges in the region are numerous. They are well known already for several decades, primarily in the areas of socio-economic situation, very high unemployment, multiple times higher than in the majority populations that we live with. that, of course, impacts and is impacted by the very low level of education. The forces that influence the Roma children and parents to withdraw from the education system are multiple. We can talk about that as well. The situation of the Roma health is the main reason why the life expectancy of Roma is across Europe, not only in the Western Balkans, between 7 to 14 years difference, which means that our lives are shorter. At the same time, the situation of housing is devastating, especially after the wars in former Yugoslavia, when the big population moves happened. A lot of people stayed on the streets, under the bridges, in illegal situations, in which it is very easy to expel them whenever a local mayor or any other politician needs a little bit more votes of the non-Roma. They just launch an eviction and claim that nobody can live in an illegal situation and nobody is above the law, etc., etc. As we see now in Belgrade with the mayor of Belgrade, who uses exactly this argument to attack the Roma in Belgrade. But COVID situation unveiled this, Ilva, and it was very visible that Roma entered the COVID situation from much worse position, and the position that was already bad became even worse. So this is a fact that we know that the situation today is actually much worse than only 3 years ago.
Zeljko, Sonja mentioned that they have arrived in the old continent some 10 centuries ago. Can you provide a brief overview of the history of the Roma people in the Southeast Europe and the Balkans, and how this history has contributed to the current situation under privileged conditions that they live in?
I believe, most of the research that we use, Ilva, for talking about Roma history is done through the trace of the language. Our language comes from old ancient Indian Sanskrit. And that's why today, when Roma communities watch Indian movies or series, there are a lot of words that overlap. So we don't need translation for them. So in the Western Balkans, we have one of the three major waves of the migration of Roma, ancient migration of Roma. Most of the Roma in the Western Balkans came through today's territory of Turkey and Asia Minor. But the situation in Western Balkans was, of course, affected by the Ottoman Empire because of the melange of the populations that lived out there. I personally come from Western Serbia, a region that is little known in the sense of history, that when Turkish Ottoman Empire, in fact, collapsed, there was a provision of authorities at that time that all Turks have to withdraw to Turkey, and many Turks actually, who were connected already with family ties, businesses, and so on, stayed in Serbia, and some of them, according to certain sources, actually declared they are Roma, because only by declaring they are Roma they could stay in Serbia. That's why we have a mix that is still having impact on our identity. But communism and post-communism impacted the most the situation that we see today. After the changes, a lot of Roma, as well as many non-Roma, but most of the Roma ended up in informal economy, informal settlements. So today's families, since that time, basically learn to find job, and they work in informal economy. They live in informal settlements, and as you know, in the Western Balkans, this is a very complex situation, especially when it comes to property rights. Since the time of communism, wars, of course, contributed to the situation of lack of personal documents and all the unresolved situations of how Roma moved from one former Yugoslav republic to another. And today, as I said, the still very strong xenophobic nationalism and racism that was, of course, strengthened by the narratives of the ex-Yugoslav wars, influence how Roma are treated today.
Briefly, Zeljko, if you have the data, because having accurate data seems another challenge in this matter. In which of the 6 Western Balkan countries there is the largest Roma community?
Well, in terms of absolute numbers, it is Serbia. But as you said, the census data are not fully reliable. They are indicative, but they are not fully reliable. Some people talk about between 350 and 400,000 Roma in Serbia. Census data, I think, show about two and a half times less population. Serbia around 150, 180. And the next one is Macedonia, which has about 50,000.
Sonja, back to you. In your you have worked with the Roma community almost entire your life, and you know better than anyone else that is listening to this podcast. Like, what are the root causes of this anti-Roma sentiment? How can we define this phenomenon, and what are any practical steps that can be taken to combat this deeply ingrained bias and promote a more inclusive society?
Well, if I would have to name one cause that is basically to be named, that is racism. Unfortunately, all the societies we are living in have this very strong racist undertone toward the Roma. That is very difficult to accept for many, even those who are not nationalists, who are not fans of autocratic or authoritarian populism. It is very difficult for the people, obviously, to accept that, yes, it is racism that makes the Roma community so excluded, or so difficult to include. The second thing I would say is, second cause is that, as Zeljko mentioned, Roma were, I dare to say, the most serious victim of transition. The amount of those who remained without job is much higher than among the non-Roma population. Then all the educational system also became non-friendly in many different ways, especially when we talk about the level of kindergartens to the Roma children. Very often they were not welcome because they did not know the language well enough, and then they would put into classes with the children for special needs. Also, some of those kids, most of those kids, had problem with the language, and they did not learn the language properly. Also, because they were isolated, so they were living in isolated communities. So and then so employment, education, housing. Again, as Zeljko said, only in Belgrade there are approximately 160 small or bigger settlements that are, some of them, without running water, without the necessary conditions for a normal life. And this is not only Belgrade. Of course, many are concentrated in cities. Why? Because they are in informal economy, and because basically they live out of the informal economy. But in the same time, what is being forgotten, that if they wouldn't be waste collectors, if they would not do what they are doing, we would probably suffocate. So they are saving the societies they are living in, even with this informal economy. And there is not enough institutional response, far from enough, to include them into formal economy. For example, according to some data, at least 20,000 Roma are involved in one or the other way in informal recycling. But that could be turned into formal real recycling and move Roma from grey to green economy. The states, the institutions are not simply ready to make that major step that would help both the Roma and the non-Roma community. And then, of course, what is also very important to underline is that the everyday culture has to be changed. And everyday culture can be changed only with a serious involvement of the major institutions, including, for example, the Ministry of Education, etc., etc.
Zeljko, I want to ask something on this regard, because I've heard sometimes in the last years that from the institutions saying that this is a choice of the Roma community to stay together. They don't want to go into a public housing that may be offered from municipalities. Is there any truth in this? And do they really prefer to stick with each other and stay near the rivers? What's the truth there?
Well, I have to say that this is a seriously undemocratic assessment of the authorities, or maybe excuse, because we can't really blame ordinary people for systemic issues that are visible at macro scale. Of course, there are certain individuals who choose this and that, but we can't end there. To give you an example, if you have macroeconomic data on high unemployment, does anybody dare to say this is the choice of any population? No. We say this is the failure of economic choices of a country. So we cannot, in the case of Roma, generalize that this is a collective choice on population, especially because we struggle, politically speaking, as a community, in terms of our internal political coordination. So how can we coordinate that all of us stay in informal settlement? So this is not the truth. There is some truth in individual choices, and I don't deny that. But this is a serious macroeconomic issue and the issue of social policy. So I can't really understand where this comes from, except if we simply say this is a comfortable excuse for doing nothing.
Sonja, are you optimistic that things can change from the institutional point of view, from the societal acceptance of the Roma community, and what can we all do to promote this social inclusion?
You mentioned that I spent almost my whole adult life involved in Roma issues, and with the absolutely conviction. I am so convinced, so I must be an optimist, that there is a way to change this situation. And in fact, we can see it on not on individual level, but broader than that. When, for example, the Open Society Foundation in the 90s in Serbia started looking for Roma youngsters to receive a fellowship for secondary and high schools, it was especially at the university level a very few. Today we can talk about thousands and thousands of young Roma women and men who are university educated. Unfortunately, many of them left the country, as did others, looking for a more secure and both economically and politically more stable situation. But definitely there is a change. There is a change. Also, I dare to say, in the understanding of this younger generation, that they can be a major power if they work together, if they struggle together for their own effort to change the situation. However, as long as the institutions are not open and not smart enough to understand that there is a choice, especially when we look at this major depopulation of the Western Balkans, there is a real choice that the Roma population can be a genuine resource. As long as this is not understood enough, as long as populist rhetorics shadow the responsible, reasonable approach to this whole story, I'm afraid we will still have a long way to go and to fight for a different approach to our Roma communities.
But meanwhile, Zeljko, since all the 6 Western Balkan countries luckily are EU member aspirant, can the EU, Brussels, do something to help these Roma communities in the region?
Absolutely. I think Sonja's point is very valid even for the Brussels, but I think I think it's first and foremost valid for the region. Just we have to have in mind that we know already from the World Bank that Roma exclusion hurts our economies in the region. Just an example of Serbia, which is the biggest economy of the region. If Roma would find the work at the same level as non-Roma, the increase in Serbian GDP would even go to 3.5% more than it was in 2017. And the fiscal benefits in terms of increased taxes and lower social assistance spending would be 2.1% of the government expenditure for the same year. So that is no brainers, given that the Roma population is the youngest ethnic group in the region, even younger than Albanians. For example, in Serbia, from the population between 14 and 29% of Roma will be the new labor entrants just in about 10 years. So there is no brainer. The EU is already helping by approving an investment package that supports investment in green and digital economies, what Sonja already said, but we need to make sure with the governments in the region and all other actors that we move the population, not only Roma, but especially Roma, from grey to green economy, and use the funding not for social assistance for Roma. Roma are the case for investment. The youngest population, multilingual, highly adaptable, entrepreneurial. We need to invest. We don't need special money for Roma. The money will be regenerated from the taxes and other types of revenues.
This is great to hear, and I hope this will happen. And we are here to discuss further steps when they happen. Thank you very much, Sonja Licht and Zeljko Jovanovic, and thank you for watching us. As always, you can be part of this conversation by joining us at AC Europe on Twitter, and also watch our episode on YouTube. Thank you.